Out of everything we're going to be talking about over the course of shared meeting, this is probably the most important stuff here that's contained in this video. And I'll probably say that about the next video that I do that has to do with shared meeting. But the reason why this is so important is because shared meaning is the point of us talking. It's the point of disclosure, is to reach some type of shared meaning where we have an understanding. We have a crossover of perceptions here in terms of what it is that we might be sharing. The image I'm using for this is of a friend, a previous student. If you knew him, you would have more shared meaning with this image in terms of the motorcycle that's out of depth of field in the background. Not knowing him, it just looks like maybe he's a biker or something along that line. So there's more to arriving at shared meaning if I told you the backstory to this, and I'm not going to. We'll just leave it at that. And that's what's interesting about shared meaning, is how selective it can be. Shared meaning is based on a number of different influences, and you could probably come up with some on your own. I looked at a number of articles and a lot of research about this, and these are the ones that I came up with here. Certainly shared meaning is based on language, it's based on perspective. Certainly those two ideas are embedded in culture. And even more, if we were to narrow that down, we reach meaning within people. And we do that through this active disclosure, of self-disclosure that we were talking about previously here. So let's take a look at these. I'm going to start with language first, and there are really a couple of different types of language out there. One is denotative, and the other one is what we call connotative language. So let's talk about the difference between those two, and let's start with this concept of denotative language. If you take the denotative, the D in denotative, and add a dictionary to dictionary, that might be the best way to go through and define denotative language. I'm giving you an associative cue with that, where denotative meaning is something that has been defined. It's already been ascribed somewhere, and the dictionary certainly is a place for denotative meaning. Some people feel that the Holy Bible is, or that the Quran is, or the Doctrine and Covenants is, or so on. You get the idea. Denotative meaning is in a spot that we can go back and check meaning against. All right? But it changes, or it evolves and develops before it ever reaches a dictionary. For example, if I say the word iPod, most of us have a denotative meaning for that, but it didn't come from a dictionary first. It came from a marketing campaign first, right? Remember these? Maybe you don't. Maybe you're too young to remember when these came out, but this was a wildly successful campaign for Apple as they introduced a device that would go through and play your hours and hours and hours of a playlist, and you can go through and organize that and transfer it from your computer to your device and blah, blah, blah. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. But this went through and put the term iPod into the dictionary. Okay, that was its etymology, there we go, where the word came from. And then the word changed a little bit, or different iterations came about as a result of perhaps the humor of putting this together, and different cultural and social manipulations of it as it went. And it even got a little dark, and actually got real dark. It got very political there, and why not? We're taking a pop icon and turning that into something that conveys a different message, shifting the meaning or the shared meaning on that. So that's what denotative, it became connotative at that point, okay? Connotative is where we create meaning. To connotate is to add notation, or with notation, that it comes from something that we've invented. We've all invented a word. With my regular class and face-to-face teaching, I would ask them to write down on a 3x5 card a word that nobody else might know, a word that they might have invented. And it's fascinating to know that I can go through and maybe tag some of the vocabulary as to where you went to high school, because specific high schools came up with their own language, their own vernacular in going through and describing things. And we come up with language to describe things, okay? We've certainly come up with a connotative language to describe things like sex or going to the bathroom and things that we're uncomfortable with. We have an entirely different language for that. Or we might work in a context where we've had to derive code in order for us to expedite the ability to reach shared meaning, like in medicine, for example. If you walked into a trauma ER and listened to the banter that went on while maybe a patient who was in cardiac arrest went in there, you might not understand what it is that they're saying with all the acronyms and the numbers that are flying around. They've created that code in order to expedite meaning. So we don't have to spend a whole lot of time explaining what's going on and what needs to happen. And that is connotative language. The same in the military, the same in motion picture production, the same in just about any kind of context. Chances are you work in a context where you have your own connotative list. So maybe to exemplify this a bit more, I have a story for you. My son Christopher came home from first grade, and he came up to his mother and said, "Mom, what's a dick?" And his mom was taken aback by this, as any good parent should be. And she goes, "Well, what do you mean?" And he says, "Well, somebody at school called me a dick today." So she explained to him that dick is a garbage word, okay, that it means penis. And when he discovered that he was called a penis, he didn't like that idea very much. Would you? Nobody really would like to be called a penis in that respect. So they had this talk, and I joined in. We had the chat, and we came to a shared meeting that dick is a garbage word, okay? So I'm not kidding. The next day, he's grocery shopping with his mom. I think it's like at Harmon's there in St. George, and Chris, as precocious as he was, while they're waiting in line, this old man queues up behind him with his grocery cart, and Chris walks up to him and says, "Hey, my name's Chris. What's your name?" And the guy says, "My name's Dick." And Chris turns to his mom and said, "Mom, his mom named him a garbage word." And of course, Dick, okay, has heard this before, and he gets down on Chris's level. And he says, "No, let me explain to you. My real name is Richard. My friends call me Dick." Making his head explode, I'm sure, at that point. But I appreciate Dick's taking the time to get down on this boy's level and to go through and maybe explain maybe the connotative idea. That's why I'm saying here to do that. Connotative messages are esoteric, meaning that they could be set up for just a small group of people to understand. Okay, we can have, my wife and I have esoteric meaning. We can speak in code to each other in a room full of people. We'll have no idea what it is that we're talking about, but we will, because we've developed the meaning, the shared meaning around whatever that term might be. And you've been there. You've been outside of an inside joke. Okay, that's esoteric. That becomes connotative meaning. All right, let's move on. Let's get into perspective. This is an interesting approach in terms of shared meaning, because all of us have a different perspective. With all the political bifurcation that's been going on here lately since last November, we're becoming more and more polarized. And I'll talk about that more in the barriers to shared meaning, the next video that accompanies this. But one illustration in particular that I made a little bit of an impact was one that involved this numeral. It's the number 9. Or it's the number 6. It depends perhaps on which side you might be standing looking down on this. If you're on the left side, it's certainly the number 6. If you're on the right side, it's certainly the number 9. And we don't know, because it all depends on the perspective, the way you're seeing this, what that has to do with it. And that's where we find meaning. And if we were convinced that my side was 6 and your side was 9, and if we decided to maybe walk around that, then our perspective's going to change, and we're going to go, oh, okay, maybe I have the ability to see meaning from your side of the numeral, thus reaching shared meaning. Now, that's an oversimplification, really, of a lot of the issues that are dividing us. But I like how it illustrates the concept that we have to leave our own standpoint and go to somebody else's in order to reach shared meaning, in order to get to that idea. Culture is a huge influence in terms of shared meaning. A long time ago, I had the great opportunity to work as a director of photography for a documentary series on Tongan culture. I knew nothing about the culture I got the assignment on a Thursday, and I was on an airplane on a Friday to, along with my crew, to go through and start the shooting series. It would take us about 4 weeks to go through and do this. And having done so, I know no Tongan. I knew nothing about Tongan culture, about what's appropriate. I worked with Tongan royalty, and in doing so, I broke many rules, just clumsily plodding through what it was that we were trying to do. And I learned along the way. I reached shared meaning along the way. Okay, sometimes I did it the hard way. For example, I was shooting what's called a laka laka, and what you're seeing in this image here are folks getting ready to go through and perform laka laka, which is a dance that goes through and talks about their genealogy within the village. It talks about their specialties within the village, what's culturally specific to that particular village. Each village within the Kingdom of Tonga has a laka laka that goes through and gives their history and talks about what they're all about. So we were shooting a particular laka laka, and the dancers were in like a marching band in a number of lines, okay, and all facing the same direction. And so I got down on my hands and my knees, actually my elbows and my knees, with my camera underneath me. The camera's on the ground because I was getting the shot of the feet going in and out of frame, and the feet were circled with these anklets of banana leaves, and when the feet would thrust forward, the leaves would fan out. And when they bring the feet back, they would fan the other way. And I thought that would be a cool cutaway shot, okay, to go through and get that, to do that in slow motion. So I'm here on my elbows and on my knees, getting the shot. And before I was able to get the shot, I got something just plowed on top of me and started getting heavier and heavier, to the point to where the camera started to invade my thoracic cavity, my chest, and I couldn't breathe. And then the camera crashed underneath me on the hard ground beneath us. And I thought I was going to die. I couldn't imagine what it was that was piling on top of me. And then, just as I thought I was going to gasp for my last breath, I couldn't, because the wind had been knocked out of me. It relieved. Okay. And suddenly I felt a hand on my shoulder, and a person peeled me off the remains of my $250,000 camera. And I looked up at him, and it was our fixer. His name was Afu. And he goes, "You okay?" And I looked up at him, and he was surrounded by these lovely Tongan women who were all just kind of giggly and looking down at me. And he goes, "They like you." And I had no idea what it was that he was talking about. They tackled me. I had 3 Tongan women tackle me, because apparently in this particular village, if you get down on your elbows and on your knees and you point your butt toward a female, and you happen to be a male, it's considered to be a proposal of marriage. And whoever jumps on you first, okay, is accepting that proposal. Well, I had 3 lovely Tongan ladies jump on me. And if you take a look, petite is not a word that Tongans and us Northern Americans have in common in terms of shared meaning, right? We figured I had about close to a half a ton of Tongan love smashing me into the hard earth there. So I learned not to, from a nonverbal standpoint, go through and propose marriage to anybody else. All kinds of cultural representations of where we're finding meaning, and certainly language factors into that as well. All right, and so does perspective. So that brings me to people, and like I said at the beginning of this, this is really kind of a combination of everything that comes together. But we find meaning in people, and not just semantic meaning or connotative, denotative meaning. We find maybe a meaning for life. A meaning of happiness. I find meaning in the person that I spend my life with. And I expand meaning as well in terms of maybe more spiritual aspects or more ethereal aspects. Or she's an educator as well, so we find meaning in terms of how we teach and how we assess. And we talk about all kinds of ideas, and in doing so, we increase each other's shared meaning. We adventure together, and we find meaning in terms of our connection to each other and how we survive and how we go through and do things on this planet. I have meanings with my kids that transcend meanings that I might have with anybody else as well. And again, because of our level of disclosure, we're finding meaning in each other, finding meaning in people. We find meaning, again, in the experiences that we have together. Or lately, I found incredible meaning in watching my son get married, to watch that other generation then start to happen. See, I get emotional even thinking about that because of meaning. So we find that in people as well, all right? Now, here's a problem with shared meaning. And I'm going to get into the barriers of shared meaning in another video, but one barrier in particular is this one, is this concept of mixed messages. And that's when the verbal messages that are coming from a source are different than the nonverbal messages that are going on. Or it could be that we're looking at a term in two different ways, or a number of different ways. So let me explain that a little bit more to you in terms of the danger of mixed messages. And, well, let's get into it. In Scotland, about 10 years ago, there was a campaign that started. It's still going on, by the way. This is not an invitation to rape me, is the name of the campaign. It's a website that you can go to. And what they found out in terms of social research is that about a quarter of the population of Scotland, both men and women, felt that if you happened to be dressed this way and you were raped, that you deserved it. And we call this rape culture, okay? And here's where mixed messages come into play here, and in terms of what cultural rules do with those mixed messages. They also indicated that if you happen to be inebriated and you get raped, that maybe you were asking for it. Or if you were engaged in some romantic interlude and it escalated to a point of sexual penetration against your will, which is rape, okay, that you had deserved that. Or even, and this is what's most mind-blowing about the campaign, if you're in a relationship and sex is expected of you or is forced upon you, that it's really not rape if you happen to be married. They were one of the first social organizations to come out, like I said, about 10 years ago and address this whole mixed message of rape culture. We've had education programs for a long time, for as long as I've been around, in terms of teaching women how not to get raped instead of teaching men to not rape. And the mixed messages there come from this concept of, well, if she happens to look a certain way, if her skirt happens to be a certain length, if she happens to walk a certain way, then maybe she's asking for it. And that's been disastrous. It's been disastrous on so many levels. 1 out of 3 women in the state of Utah has been subject to sexual violence. 1 out of 4 women on Utah's campuses has been raped. 1 out of 4. Over the course of my teaching and over the course of my being a parent, I've seen these ratios come true. It's the danger of what happens when we don't reach shared meaning. When we go through and maybe put that responsibility onto somebody else. And it's time to stop doing that. So watch for the next video in this module that deals with the barriers of shared meaning. We'll get into others besides this concept of mixed messages.